I grew up believing that survival was a gift reserved for people stronger than me. My childhood taught me to keep my head down, to hide in the background, to pretend that wanting more made you ungrateful. I was a child who listened rather than spoke, a girl who studied the world through sound. While other kids chased ordinary dreams, I fed myself on music because it was the only thing that didn't ask for explanations. My mother worked tirelessly, and my brothers filled the house with all the noise and chaos 5 boys naturally create. I was the girl who wandered between rooms humming melodies that didn't belong to anyone yet. I didn't know it then, but I was already writing my future, note by note, through instinct alone. Music pulled me forward. It became the only place where I felt unafraid to take up space. When I stepped on stage for the first time with a small New Jersey band, I wasn't a timid girl anymore. I was a woman capable of commanding an entire room. And that feeling, that electricity, became my anchor. But the world rarely hands victories to women who dream too loudly. During one early performance, I felt a sharp pain radiating down my back. I pushed through it, convinced it was nothing more than exhaustion. The next morning, I woke unable to move without agony. Doctors explained that I had suffered a severe spinal injury, the kind that could end a career before it even begins. The words clung to me like a sentence I wasn't prepared to serve. I remember lying in the hospital bed, staring at a ceiling that refused to give answers, negotiating with my own fear. People told me to rest, to recover, to accept that maybe life wanted something different for me. But I refused to believe that the universe would give me a voice only to silence it before I had the chance to use it. I healed slowly, reluctantly, stubbornly. And when I finally returned to the stage, pain still flickered through my spine, reminding me of my limits. But I carried it with me, because the alternative was letting go of the only life that ever felt like mine. Not long after, I signed with a label, and Never Can Say Goodbye turned into my first hit. For the first time, I felt like everything I had endured, the injury, the fear, the uncertainty, had pushed me into the exact place I was supposed to be. But success can be a deceptive companion. It gives generously but demands obedience, and I was still too inexperienced to understand the cost. Then came I Will Survive. When the song was recorded, it wasn't meant to be an anthem. The label treated it like a spare part, a B-side track attached to a record they believed had more commercial value. No one in that office thought it would become anything more than filler. But I felt something the moment I sang the first line. The lyrics didn't belong to just one woman. They belonged to every woman who had been told to stay quiet, to accept less, to endure without complaint. When the track finally hit the clubs, it spread like a spark catching dry ground. Women danced, cried, screamed, and claimed it as their own. And just as the world began celebrating my rise, my private life began to unravel. I married my manager, believing that loyalty and partnership would create a stable home. Instead, I found myself shrinking again, trying to maintain peace while my confidence slowly eroded in a marriage filled with criticism, doubt, and emotional control. I kept performing, kept smiling, kept pretending that my voice stayed strong even when everything else inside me wavered. My injury resurfaced, bringing back the same pain I thought I had defeated. There were days I could barely stand upright. I felt the weight of fame pressing on my shoulders like an invisible hand reminding me that women in entertainment are allowed to struggle only as long as they hide it well. But I kept going, because by then, the world had turned I Will Survive into a promise, and I couldn't bear the thought of betraying that promise, not to them and not to myself. The night I finally admitted that my marriage was destroying me didn't happen during a fight or a crisis. It came quietly during a routine dinner when I realized I had stopped recognizing my own voice outside of a recording studio. I had given too much of myself away in the name of devotion, in the name of loyalty, in the name of a stability that wasn't even real. Survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it begins with a soft whisper inside you, the kind that says, "You have been here before. You know how to rise." And I did. I told myself that the next chapter of my life wouldn't be written on fear. It would be written on the same determination that had carried me from a shy girl in New Jersey to a woman who had recorded one of the most powerful anthems in the world. I didn't know yet exactly what surviving would demand of me, but I was ready to find out. Divorce after 26 years of marriage does not feel like a clean break. It feels like a dismantling, a slow, deliberate removal of the pieces you once believed formed a solid foundation. Walking away from my husband was not simply an act of independence. It was a declaration that I would no longer negotiate my worth. People expected me to crumble. They assumed that after decades with the same partner, I would feel lost without him. But the truth was simpler and far more painful. I had been lost with him, slowly fading into the background of my own life. Leaving wasn't the moment I broke. It was the moment I became whole again. Professionally, the industry I had once dominated began shifting toward younger voices and new sounds. The spotlight drifted elsewhere, and my presence no longer commanded effortless attention. Some assumed my time had passed. They believed my greatest work was behind me. But survival had never been about applause for me. It had always been about endurance, transformation, and the refusal to accept silence as destiny. After the divorce, I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. What did I want outside of music? Who was I when no one expected anything from me? What kind of woman did I want to be when I wasn't performing strength for an audience? I found comfort in reflection, in faith, in the process of rebuilding myself piece by piece. I began understanding that survival carries a different meaning when you grow older. It becomes less about proving yourself and more about protecting the parts of you that should have never been compromised. My health challenges continued, and pain often reminded me that my body had battled more storms than most people knew. But instead of feeling betrayed by it, I began treating it like an old friend who had carried me farther than expected. And then something shifted. The world rediscovered, "I Will Survive." Generations who hadn't been alive when it first came out began singing it with the same conviction as the women who danced to it in the 70s. The song crossed languages, cultures, identities. It wasn't just a disco anthem. It became a declaration of resilience for anyone who had ever fought to reclaim their own life. And for the first time, I allowed myself to absorb what that truly meant. I realized that my survival had always been larger than my career, larger than my marriage, larger than any hardship I had endured. It was proof. Proof that women don't break the way people expect them to. Proof that strength doesn't always announce itself. Proof that healing can happen long after the world stops paying attention. I returned to the studio with a clarity I had never possessed before. I sang not to impress, not to chart, not to compete, but to honor the woman who had spent a lifetime refusing to disappear. My voice carried new weight, new depth, new truth. I wasn't just singing. I was reclaiming space that had always belonged to me. During performances, I watched audiences rise to their feet the moment the opening chords of "I Will Survive" filled the room. They weren't reacting to nostalgia. They were reacting to recognition, to something inside themselves that remembered what it felt like to endure. And every time I sang that song, it felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but truer. A woman who has survived enough time stops performing strength and starts embodying it. My journey hasn't been simple, and it hasn't been gentle, but it has been honest. And that honesty is what carried me through every injury, every heartbreak, every doubt, every quiet night when I questioned whether my voice still mattered. I survived because I refused to let pain define me. I survived because I trusted that every ending would eventually lead me back to myself. I survived because I understood that a woman's power is not measured by how loudly she roars, but by how firmly she rises. And today, when I step on stage and the lights come up, I no longer ask whether my time has passed. I simply sing, not as a symbol, not as an icon, but as a woman who has lived enough, lost enough, loved enough, and endured enough to know that surviving is not the final chapter. It is the beginning of every new one.